Sky, next slide, so she can move.
Okay.
Here we go.
Are people coming in now? Yep.
There's 22 so far.
Where are you seeing that?
When you click on it, says panelists for attendees 21
Oh, there we go.
on the little bottom with the little people.
All right. Is Denise on? Can we hear her?
I don't see Denise yet.
Thanks for joining, everybody. Just give us a few more minutes for people to hop on and we'll get started in a bit.
What does it say? Good afternoon. Yeah, it's.
Can you hear us, Denise?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we just can't see you quite yet.
So we're trying to click on the camera, but I don't know if it has a restriction.
Ooh. Maybe so.
Because I'm okay.
Oh, now we can see you.
Okay, I can't see you, but you can see me.
Yeah, we can see you.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you for your help. Thank you, Robert. Have a great day.
And we see you like 1,000 miles away from that big old conference room in Miami.
Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, I think we have quite a few people on, so I'm just gonna get started. Thank you everybody for joining. We're gonna get kicked off really quick. I want to thank everybody for joining. I see a few familiar names from our Adventist Heritage Schools. I want to also say a big thank you to our panelists for taking the time to speak with us today. There's been a lot of questions about the candidate process for international students needing visa sponsorship, and we're hoping that the session will help make the process as clear as possible to both our current graduate nurses and any of the students joining that are interested in pursuing a career with Advent Health in the future. And I also want to introduce our panelists for today. Anna Colon, who is on, you can wave at us. She's the Senior Manager of International Recruitment here at Advent Health. And Denise Gavica Perez, who is an attorney at Ackerman and works really closely with us, hand in hand, with our international team. And yeah, without further delay, I will go ahead and give the floor to Anna to get us started.
Good afternoon, you all. Thank you so much for joining. I don't know if it's afternoon or morning where you're calling from, but in the meantime, it's our pleasure to be here with you all. There are some of my team members on the call as well. Raquel Russell, who will wave. She's my superstar team supervisor for international recruitment. And we partner with your strategies team, and we partner with your recruiters to help assist and facilitate your ability to work for Advent Health as international students. So we have a PowerPoint that we are going to share with you. Denise is going to do the presentation of what an F1 international student is and what they need to continue to be employed at Advent Health. I am going to request that we do a question and answers at the end. So to better assist and facilitate the rapidness of this presentation, I would like to request that you all wait for the questions till the end. Do write them down. I am an educator, I am a nurse. So please write them down so that once Denise is done with the presentation, then we can answer some of your questions. Denise, I see names, like Mika suggested. There are, it looks like educators, students, potential employees, current employers, employees, and recruiters on the call. So you're going to be speaking to a vast number of people, and we will answer questions when you get to the end of your presentation. So Denise Gavica-Perez.
Great, thank you, Anna. Hello, everyone. My name is Denise Gavica-Perez, as they mentioned, and I am a partner at Ackerman, a law firm with offices nationwide. I have over 24 years of experience working in the immigration arena, specifically with companies that hire employees, talented employees from overseas and from within the United States. And so I'm very happy and pleased to be here with all of you and with this amazing panel that I work with daily, day in and day out. We're here to give you information to help you make informed decisions. And as Anna mentioned, we will be glad to answer any questions you may have after the presentation is over and anytime thereafter as well. So we're going to start off with the beginning, where you all started. For those of you who came from overseas, you entered the United States with an F1 student visa. And if you don't mind switching to the third slide. Thank you. Okay, so before you entered the United States, you and most of you know this, of course, because you did this already, but I want to walk through these steps for those who are not international students, so they're aware of the steps that you had to go through to get to where you are right now. So you first requested this form from a university, and this form is a certificate for non-immigrant student status. And you need this form in order to request the visa stamp at the US consulate before you enter the United States. So it all starts here with this form. It's a Form I-20, and as you can see on the left-hand side, it specifies the university that's where you will be attending or where you attend, and it explains. It also notes the dates, the start date and the end date of your academic program. So it starts with this form. You take it to the U.S. consulate to request a visa, and if we go to the next slide, at the U.S. consulate, a consular officer reviews your case to make sure that you do not have the intent to abandon your residence overseas, and that you truly have the intent to study in the United States. So you provide them with that I-20, which is endorsed by the university that you attend, and you present it to the consular officer at the U.S. consulate, and then they stamp your passport with the F1 visa. And this is all occurring overseas at a U.S. consulate, wherever the student is from. So as you can see, the visa on the right-hand side, it indicates F1, which that is the designation for a student visa, F1. As opposed to H-1B or O or R, the appropriate visa for an international student is F1. And then underneath it, it says issue date and expiration date. So in this example, this student was issued their F1 visa on April 1st of 2015, and it's valid through March 30th of 2020 because that's how long their academic program was supposed to last. So this individual was going to work for the University of Findlay. And by the way, this is a sample. This is not anyone I know. This is not one of my clients. So I'm just sharing a sample for everyone to understand the process of steps that the F1 visa requires. So once the visa is issued, then you enter the United States. Upon arriving to the United States, Customs Border Protection will issue a document known as an arrival departure record, which is an I-94. And if we go to the next slide, you can see an example of the I-94. The I-94 is a document that's issued to anyone who enters the United States from overseas, who is a non-immigrant, someone who's entering the United States temporarily. that I-94 keeps track of the person's status and how long they can remain in the United States. In the case of a student, because students tend to continue studying, they go from an associate's to a bachelor's, sometimes to a master's or a PhD, the government indicates DS. DS, if you notice on the I-94, the document where it says admitted until date, it says DS. DS stands for duration of status. Duration of status is tied to your I-20. So if you originally entered the United States to pursue an associate's degree, and then you decide to pursue a bachelor's degree, you have to have the I-20 endorsed to reflect that you're going to continue studying. And that's why the I-94 indicates DS, okay? So for those of you who are in this meeting, most of you, the students, that is, you have an I-20, you have a visa, and you have an I-94. Of those three documents, the most important document is the I-20. The second most important document is your I-94. So if you haven't already, I suggest that you go to the Customs Border Protection website. Again, that's Customs Border and Protection website, and type in your passport information so you can pull up your I-94. All of you should have access to your I-94. Why? Because the government is not perfect and they make mistakes on I-94s. You want to make sure that your I-94 was properly endorsed so that it's consistent with your visa and your I-20. So I urge you all to go in to that website and print out your I-94 and carry it with you in your passport so that you have a record of being admitted to the United States. Anyone who's not admitted to the United States, meaning who was not interviewed by a Customs Border Protection officer when they entered with their visa, is considered what's called an EWI, entry without inspection. So if the person entered without inspection, that means they never met with a Customs Border Protection officer who issued this I-94. Carrying this I-94 is evidence that you entered the United States and were inspected upon entering the US, okay? So if we go to the next slide. So while you're pursuing your academic program, let's use a hypothetical of someone who entered the United States to pursue an associate's degree in nursing. While the student is studying and pursuing their academic program, they can work in the United States part-time under what's called curricular practical training. It's called curricular practical training because it's during your degree program. Curricular practical training is part-time, and it's very important that you track. For those of you who have used curricular practical training, it's very important that you track how much curricular practical training you have actually signed up for, because if you use a year or more, then you will not be able to pursue optional practical training, which is upon graduating. So curricular practical training is part-time. It's while you're studying. Optional practical training, which we're going to go into an extensive discussion about that, is what you pursue right before you graduate. The right time to apply for optional practical training is within 90 days of graduating. So what all of you should do, for those of you who have not requested optional practical training yet and are ready to graduate soon, you go to the International Student Department at your university, ask to speak to a designated school official, a DSO, designated school official, and ask them to that you're interested in OPT, optional practical training, so that they can start the paperwork for that. And you can, many universities will assist the students, the international students, with this paperwork. So we go into the details of the steps that you need to take. Sort of, I don't go into explicit detail, but I'll walk you through the steps in a minute. But I want to point out where it says OPT facts. I want to go over each of these to make sure that all of you are aware of these facts, okay? So first of all, under optional practical training, it's for 1 year, and it's for full-time employment, as opposed to part-time employment under curricular practical training. So the first bullet point, as indicated there, it says the student must be in valid full-time student status at least for 1 academic year, semester, and it's to apply for the OPT. I'm sorry, it's right before you graduate. It's granted to international students only to work with a U.S. institution company after graduation upon completing your academic program. OPT is available for 12 months per degree. So if you pursue an associate's, graduate, start working on optional practical training for 1 year, and then you decide that you want to pursue a bachelor's in nursing, and you're at the point of completing it, you can also have optional practical training again for 1 entire year. So that's 2 years of OPT if you pursue a bachelor's, of course. And then let's say you decide to pursue a master's, you will have optional practical training 1 more time. So it's every time you finish an academic program. Okay, so let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, as indicated there, it says to apply for optional practical training, OPT, within, and I'm using those terms alternatively, to apply for OPT within 90 days before graduation. The OPT application must be filed and received by the United States Immigration. So the form for OPT is filed with United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, USCIS. And then the information is registered in CVIS. And then once you're also going to file an employment authorization application. So once you receive an employment authorization document, EAD, then you can start employment with the company on a full-time basis. The position that you start off with has to be related to your academic program. So you can't, for example, use an OPT EAD, which is employment authorization document, with an architectural company, because your degree is not in architecture, it's in nursing. So the degree must relate to the employment. So you use your employment authorization, your EAD, with an employer that is specific to the nursing industry, or has a job available for you in the nursing industry. Okay, so if we can skip to the next slide, please. So as I mentioned a few minutes ago, it's at the very top of the slide, it says students must work in a position directly related to their field of study. And then we go straight into where it says applying for OPT. You first have to apply for the OPT recommendation, and you can do that with the DSO or with an international student advisor. And then you have to file the OPT application with USCIS. So I kind of jumped ahead when I started covering this part, but you pretty much have to file that application, and most definitely file the EAD application so that you can receive your EAD right when you're supposed to start employment after your studies are completed. Okay, so let's see. I'm sure all of you, and if you're not, are familiar with the 60-day grace period. Whether or not you pursue OPT, once your studies are over, you have a 60-day grace period to remain in the United States and make a decision as to whether or not you're going to change your status or leave the United States or work under EAD OPT. You have exactly 60 days. I would say 30 just to be conservative and protect yourself, but you have exactly 60 days. It's your grace period after you finish your studies. That 60-day grace period also applies when you complete your OPT. So let's say that you've had OPT already for 1 year, and today is the end of that year. You have 60 days to decide whether or not you're going to leave the United States or change your status or extend your student status. No more than 60 days. If you surpass the 60 days, then you're considered out of status. And we don't want to get near 60. So say to yourself 30. Don't say 60. Don't think 60. Think 30. So that you never run into a situation where you either remain in the United States too long after your OPT ends or too long after your studies are completed. Okay, so let's go to the next page. So as I mentioned previously, OPT is good for 1 year. There is an exception to those who have pursued studies in science, technology, engineering, or math. And unfortunately, and I don't know why, nursing does not fall under science for this, what they call a STEM OPT extension. So if you were studying, let's say, technology or engineering or math, and you've already completed 1 year of OPT, you would be entitled to an additional 2 years, 1 year, and then you have to renew another year, and so a total of 3 years of employment authorization OPT. But that's, again, for those who have pursued studies in science, technology, engineering, or math, and for some odd reason, nursing does not fall under science. So a person who does qualify for STEM, I'm just providing this to you as an example in case you speak to other students that tell you, well, but I can renew my EAD for another year or two. How come you can't? Well, the reason why is because nursing does not fall under the list of occupations that qualify for STEM. For those that do qualify for STEM, if you notice on this slide, At the very top, you'll see post-completion OPT. That's what will be indicated on your I-20. When your OPT is endorsed, you can see it's for 1 year, March 16th, 2020 through March 15th, 2021 in the example I've provided. Then right underneath it, STEM OPT is for those who fall under science, technology, engineering, math, and they can extend their OPT for an additional 2 years. Okay, so if you could go to the next slide, please. Okay, so this is an example of the employment authorization document that you will be issued whenever your OPT and EAD are approved. And if you notice, if you look at the bottom part, it says valid from 6/24/24 through 6/23/25, because it's exactly 1 year that you're given to work under optional practical training. And this is the card that you will provide to your employers whenever they ask you for evidence of employment. This is after you graduate. Once OPT is approved and you receive your EAD card, this is a document that you would provide when you have to complete a Form I-9, which is completed by everyone, American, US citizens, permanent residents, everyone who has work authorization. Whenever they start employment, the companies have to verify that you're work authorized. This is the document that you would provide, that you should provide to an employer as evidence of employment. Okay, so we go to the next slide. All right, so the next topic of conversation, of discussion is permanent residence. But before we jump to permanent residence, I want to make sure that you all understand the difference between the status you currently hold and the status that you will hold in the future for those of you who decide to apply for a green card. You currently hold non-immigrant F1 student status, non-immigrant being the key term. It means it's temporary, it's not immigrant. If you want to become a green card holder or a permanent resident, that is known as immigrant. So while you're studying or while you're working on OPT for that year, you are still a non-immigrant. You continue to hold F1 non-immigrant status, even if you're not studying. The visa that you have in your passport, the student visa, applies to the OPT. Only a student can have OPT or an EAD based on OPT. So while you're studying and while you're working, either under curricular practical training or as under OPT, you're going to hold student status, which is temporary. It's a non-immigrant status. You have to maintain that status valid at all times if you decide that you want to remain here and apply for a green card, because without that status, you cannot be physically in the United States. And there's a difference between a visa and status. A visa is what you use to enter the United States. We saw it in the beginning of the presentation. Everyone has to have a visa. Well, forgive me, Europeans don't have to have a visa. There's some people that are visa exempt, but the majority of international employees or people are on a non-immigrant visa. They have to have the visa stamp in their passport when they enter. Once you enter in the United States, you're holding a status, and that status is the F1 status. If you leave the United States, you have no status. For example, if I leave the United States, I have no status either. I'm a US citizen, but I don't have US citizenship status because my body is not physically in the United States. So you use the F1 visa to enter, but while you're here, you hold a status. And this is really important for you to remember because it will be part of your entire immigration experience until you become a permanent resident, for those of you who are interested in becoming permanent residents. So again, while you're working, you will be F1 status. It's non-immigrant, it's temporary. And now, let's say I would say during your first or second month of holding that status, or even before, if possible, you want to start making plans as to whether you're going to remain in the United States or not. If you decide that you want to remain in the United States, you have to start planning in advance to either extend your student status by continuing to study. Let's say the example I gave earlier, associates to bachelor's, bachelor's to master's, or changing your status if you can. In order to change your status, let's say to a visa known as a the H-1B, non-immigrant worker visa classification, which is a worker visa classification. It's longer than the 1 year OPT period. It's an actual worker visa. Not everyone who has an H-1B has to start with an F1 student visa, but the H-1B is a worker visa. So if you decide that you want to remain in the United States beyond the year, and you find a position that qualifies for the H-1B, then the company petitioning for you, which I'm assuming is going to be AdventHealth, of course, would file a change of your status from F1 student to H-1B non-immigrant worker. Okay. In order to qualify for an H-1B, just to be clear, and I want to be quick on this because I want to jump to the green card. In order to qualify for an H-1B, the position that you're being offered must require a bachelor's degree. Because nursing, bedside nursing, registered nursing positions usually do not require a bachelor's degree, those positions do not qualify. However, if you apply for a nurse managerial position, and that's whatever the requirements are, it's whatever AdventHealth requires for the position. If nurse managerial positions typically require a bachelor's degree, sometimes higher, a master's many times, those positions would qualify for an H-1B, but not a registered nurse, your standard traditional registered nurse position, unless the company requires it. If the company requires a bachelor's degree, then you can change your status from an F1 to an H-1B. Okay, but we're going to set that aside because not many nursing positions require a bachelor's degree, and I'd rather focus on the green card for those of you who are interested, and to make sure that you properly prepare to remain in the United States while the green card is in process. So we're going to cover the green card process now, but I want to pause for a second to see if Anna has any comments. Anna? Or no? Okay, so I will continue. All right, so again, I want you to focus on that you currently have student status, which is temporary. And the way that I explain it to many clients that are not nurses, but all types of clients, for them to understand and always remember, picture two columns. You are currently under column 1 as a non-immigrant temporary person in the United States. Under column 1, you have your tourists, you have your students, you have your H-1B workers, your O-1 workers, people who come to attend a trial. So many people fall under that first column. And what I mean by people, I mean people from overseas, okay? So many fall under that first column. And if they decide that they want to become permanent residents of the United States, which is the same thing as a green card holder or immigrant visa holder, to jump from column 1 to column 2, you have to go through a process, okay? And once you jump to column 2, that means you're a green card holder. But it takes time to jump from column 1 to column 2. It requires a lot of paperwork to jump from column 1 to column 2, and a lot of patience, because right now there's what's called retrogression. There's a higher demand for green cards than there is a supply of green cards. And that applies to all occupations, not just nurses. So for CFOs, for COOs, for CEOs, for engineers, architects, physicians, for all these different occupations, there's less immigrant visas available, green cards available versus a demand. There's a high demand. And as a result of that, you have to try your very best to maintain your non-immigrant status at all times if you decide that that's what you want to pursue. Okay, so now we're going to go into the green card process for you to have a better understanding of how the green card process works with your non-immigrant status. Okay, so basically, as a nurse, there's a special classification, and I'm sorry, I haven't jumped to the next slide yet. I'm so sorry. If we can go back to the other slide. Oh, perfect. Okay, right there. All right, so registered nurses fall under what's called Schedule A workers. Schedule A workers are, in order for the government realizes that there's a shortage of nurses. And because of that, they carve out one of the green card steps, one of the steps in the green card process, so that the process is shortened, believe it or not, and the nurse can become a green card holder quicker. So typically, in order to obtain permanent residence based on employment with an employer as a sponsor, it's a 3-step process. There are exceptions. Some cases are 2 steps. Schedule A nurses are 2 steps, but typically it's 3 steps. The first step is filing what's known as a labor certification with the U.S. Department of Labor, a PERM. That part of the process is filed with the U.S. Department of Labor. It's not even filed with immigration. So again, under that first step, known as PERM, the government takes altogether between preparing the case and filing it and waiting for a decision from the U.S. Department of Labor, it is currently taking 2 years. currently. Okay, other times it has been a year, but now it's taking 2 years. But luckily, as a registered nurse, you don't have to go through step number 1. You go directly to step number 2. Okay, so step number 2 in the traditional green card process based on employment is removed from the process for a Schedule A nurse. And you start off with step number 2, which can take, after the case is filed, it's a case that's filed with immigration, and I'll walk you through more details in this presentation, but I'm just going to generally describe this to you. The company starts off by filing what's known as an immigrant petition for alien worker on your behalf, on behalf of a beneficiary nurse, asking immigration, which is the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, to determine whether or not the nurse is eligible for a green card in the future. So under that step, that first step in your case, the USCIS, I'll abbreviate it, again, it's United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, USCIS, the officer, will review the employer's petition to determine if the employer has the ability to pay the salary that you've been offered, if the employer is a legitimate business, and if you possess the credentials related to the position. So as a nurse, you'll have your diploma, you'll have certain certifications that are required, but when that form, it's a form I-140, I-140, when the employer files that form I-140 with USCIS, the officer is reviewing the case to determine whether or not you're eligible based on what I just described. And once they determine that you are eligible, they approve that form I-140. The date when the government receives that form I-140 from the employer it locks in what's called your priority date. That priority date is critical for you to always keep track of. So let's say that the employer filed an I-140 for you and immigration received it today. Your priority date would be February 1st of 2024. That's a date that's going to follow you until you become a green card holder. Okay, so again, it's termed priority date. So that's step 1. And I'll go into more detail as to step 1 in a minute. I just want to take you to step 2. Step 2 is when you file a form that's known as an adjustment of status application. And I'm abbreviating the term of the form, but it's an adjustment of status application. And the key word is status, and you're adjusting it. So basically that's an application that you file telling USCIS that they concluded you're eligible for a green card when they approved the I-140, but eligibility doesn't mean that you have a green card. It just means you're eligible. You have to take the second step, which is filing that form I-485 to request that your status be adjusted from a non-immigrant to an immigrant. So asking the government to switch you from column 1 to column 2. And in order to do that, there has to be a green card available. There are green cards available for those who have priority dates that are current, meaning if your date of February 1st, 2024 appears on a document, which I will show you in a minute, it's known as a visa bulletin. If your priority date appears on that visa bulletin, actually the day after, because it's not February 1st, it would be February 2nd, then there's a green card available. Then you can file your adjustment of status application. But until your priority date is current, you cannot file your adjustment of status application. Again, it's the form I-485. Let's say that there are green cards available and that you're able to file your form I-485. You will file your form I-485 along with an employment authorization application and an advanced parole application. The advanced parole application is for you to be able to travel in and out of the United States, because as a student holding an F1, you cannot travel overseas when you have an adjustment of status application until you have that travel document. The other document is the employment authorization document, which you can file along with your adjustment of status application, as I mentioned. And that employment authorization document, I'm going to abbreviate it, EAD, will replace the EAD that you hold under OPT. So the way that it typically works, in the best case scenario, in the perfect world, you will pursue your work as a nurse. You will work as a nurse for a year, but before reaching that year, you file a form I-485 if there are green cards available, meaning if your priority date is current. And when you file your form I-485, it's filed along with an employment authorization document, advanced parole. Once you reach the point that your EAD expires under that OPT F1 status, you will switch over to the EAD under the adjustment of status application. And both EADs are different. One is based on OPT, the other one is based on a pending adjustment of status application. Again, the issue that we're dealing with is that you cannot file that EAD application until there are green cards available. And right now, there are no green cards available. And again, that's for every profession, not just for nurses. I don't want you to feel like if the government is focused on, making it impossible for all of us to have you working permanently. So now we're going to continue here with the presentation. I just want you to be familiar with the different branches of the government that are involved in the process of a green card. The first one being the U.S. Department of Labor. Before we can even file a Form I-140, remember step one, before we can file that Form I-140 with USCIS, when I say we, I mean the petitioner, the employer, the company on your behalf, the U.S. Department of Labor has to tell us what the proper wage, the appropriate wage is for the position that you're filling within the county where you're going to work. So if you're going to work, let's say in Ocala, Florida, then we would have to request that the government provide us, the U.S. Department of Labor provide us with a prevailing wage, an official prevailing wage from the for the hospital in Ocala. We have prevailing wages for many of the Advent Health hospitals, but I just want you to be aware of this, and it's important for you to know which hospitals have prevailing wages, because currently the U.S. Department of Labor is taking anywhere from 6 to 8 months to issue a prevailing wage, and it's not per applicant, it's in general. So one prevailing wage can be used for multiple applicants. It could be used for one nurse or for 50 nurses or 100 nurses or 200, 1,000. One prevailing wage, an official prevailing wage from the U.S. Department of Labor, is used for all of the I-140 cases that are filed, all the petitions that are filed. The prevailing wage is good for a period of time. And what we do from our end at the firm is we request extensions before they expire, so that because they expire in June of every year, June 30th of every year, and we request an extension so that by the time the prevailing wage expires, at least within a couple of weeks from that date, if not exact at the date, we have a new prevailing wage. Okay, so I just want you to be aware that one of several agencies involved with your green card process is the U.S. Department of Labor. That's where it all starts. Okay, once we have a prevailing wage, we file the I-140 and everything's fine. The other branch of the government that is involved with the green card process is the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, so USCIS. So the case goes from the U.S. Department of Labor, we receive an official prevailing wage determination, we prepare the Form I-140, and then we file the Form I-140 with USCIS. After USCIS approves the I-140 on behalf of from the company on your behalf, then we wait for a green card to become available. The branch of the government that dictates immigrant visas is the U.S. Department of State. When you requested your visa overseas, the F-1 visa, and you went to the consulate, that was under the U.S. Department of State's jurisdiction. Okay, so I just want you to be aware. It's just information for you to know exactly which government branches, agencies are working with you for the green card when you decide to apply for a green card. Okay, there are other agencies of the government at a state level, like for licensing, credentialing, etc. But overall, this is the federal. These are the branches of the federal government that take part in determining whether or not you are eligible for a green card and whether you receive one at the end. Okay, so let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, so here are the steps, and I would be glad to share this with all of you. Whoever would like a copy of the presentation, we'll share it with you whenever you request it. Okay, so the first step, again, and I'm going to go quick on these because I pretty much covered it, but I want you to see where they fall in the presentation. So step one, again, is the immigrant petition for alien worker, the Form I-140, and it basically explains to you that the hospital files the Form I-140. And the date that the government receives the Form I-140, it sets your priority date. And priority date is defined there for you, okay? Then if you can go to the next slide, please. Okay, then you need to track the document that I mentioned earlier, which I have an example here in the presentation for you. It's called the Visa Bulletin. It's prepared by the U.S. Department of State. And you're going to be, it's issued on a monthly basis. So for example, the bulletin for February of 2024 was already available mid-January of 24. The bulletin for March of 24 will be available in February. It gives you an idea as to, or it helps you prepare for when an immigrant visa becomes available to you, because that's when you'll be able to file step 2. You cannot file the adjustment of status application, step 2, Form I-45, until there's a green card available, okay? And then as indicated there, within a couple of days of receiving the case, the immigration sends us a notification, a receipt notice, letting us know that they received the Form I-140. You, as the employee, do not receive a copy of that receipt from USCIS because, again, it belongs to the petitioner. The petitioner is the employer. They're the ones that filed the petition, and you're the beneficiary of the petition. So that I-140 receipt goes to the attorney of record, and a courtesy copy goes to the employer. If the case is if when the Form I-140 is filed with immigration, you include a request for premium processing service, the government will render a decision on that I-140, again, step 1, in 15 days. But it's an additional cost, and it's not always necessary, especially now that there are no green cards available. It's not really worth it to expedite the decision on the I-140 because typically under the regular processing route, it takes about 6 months or so for the I-140 to be approved, okay? So if we can go to the next slide. Okay, so here is the discussion about step 2, the adjustment of status application, which includes the application for employment authorization and application for the travel document. Again, you cannot proceed to step 2 until a green card is available. But once you can file the Form I-485, one of the most important documents for you to obtain is the employment authorization document. What we recommend to all of our nurses that have adjustment of status applications pending, when we first file the case, the government will send us a receipt, the same way that they send us a receipt for the I-140, and the company receives a courtesy copy. In this case, I receive, or the attorney of record receives, the receipt for the adjustment of status application, the employment authorization application, and advance parole, the application for travel, and the applicant, the nurse, will receive courtesy copies of those 3 applications so that they know that the case is in process, okay? And then what we recommend to those nurses who have been able to file the adjustment of status application, we recommend that once we have those receipts, or once they receive the receipts, that they contact immigration immediately. That they first obtain a letter from the hospital stating that they're healthcare professionals and they need their employment authorization document immediately. That the nurse take that letter from the hospital and send it to immigration, to USCIS, asking for them to expedite their employment authorization document. This type of expedite is not the same as the premium processing 15-day expedite that I mentioned that can be used to expedite the I-140. It's not the same thing. It's a favor that we ask the government to please expedite the issuance of the EAD card because you're a healthcare professional and you're needed, desperately needed, for the hospital to be able to, of course, as you know, treat the patients. So again, when you're able to file the I-45 because a green card is available and you receive the receipts for the Form I-45 and the EAD and the advance parole, which typically takes anywhere from 1 to 2 weeks, sometimes 3 weeks after the entire case is filed, that second part, once you have that receipt, you will ask the government to expedite your EAD, okay? So if we can go to the next slide, and we're about to start the discussion on the visa bulletin, which is critical for you to have a good understanding of this. Okay, so there's a document called the visa bulletin. Again, I mentioned it previously. It's prepared by the U.S. Department of State, and it's issued on a monthly basis. I did not include the actual visa bulletin in this presentation because it would have taken up too much space, but I pulled out the information and I set it up here for you so that you can focus on the section of the visa bulletin that pertains to you. There are 2 sections. There's a family-based section at the top, and then there's the employment-based section, second half of the document. And your focus should be on employment-based because your case is not based on sponsorship by a family member. There are going to be some cases where it is. Some nurses may qualify for a green card based on a family-based process. You can have multiple processes, but in your case, if you're going to work through a hospital, the hospital serving as your sponsor, your classification will fall under employment-based preference instead of family-based preference or lottery or political asylum, etc. So your focus is going to be on the employment-based preference. Under employment-based, which is known as EB, EB stands for employment-based, there are 5 subcategories, EB1 through EB5. EB1 and 2 do not apply to you if you're a registered nurse who is going to work in the traditional registered nurse position. EB4 and 5 do not apply to you. EB5 is for $1 million investors. EB4 is for religious workers or other individuals that have special preferences. EB1 is for individuals of extraordinary ability or multinational managers, executives. So EB1 does not apply. EB2 could apply, but if you're applying for a position that requires a master's degree. So a nurse manager position, for instance. So your cases fall under 3rd preference category, EB3. Okay, so EB3 are skilled workers. It's for any position that requires less than a bachelor's plus 5 years of experience. So for positions that require no degree or an associate's or a bachelor's, up to 4 years of experience. Once the position, if a position requires a bachelor's plus 5 years, it falls under 2nd preference category. But just to keep it simple, for Schedule A workers, for nurses who are going to be working in the traditional registered nurse position, you're going to fall under EB3. Okay, so we can go to the next slide. Okay, so you see that 4th and 5th is there, but you can ignore that again because 5th does not apply. Those for $1 million investors. 4th does not apply. It's for special immigrants. What appears on the visa bulletin starts under the employment-based section is final action dates for employment-based preference cases. There are going to be 2 employment-based tables on the visa bulletin under the section of employment. There's the final action dates for employment-based preferences, and then there's the dates for filing, which is the 2nd section of the bulletin. Forgive me, I'm sorry. Sorry. Yes? Yes?
Brief intermission.
Hi,
Yeah,
I'm
take it
sorry.
easy.
I'm sorry. I need to call you back. I thought it was Advent Health because I'm in a presentation right now and I thought they were calling me from this group. I'm so sorry about that. Thank you. Okay, I'll call you back. I'm sorry, everyone. I thought it was Anna or Raquel who was calling me because it says Russell. Anyway, forgive me. So going back to what we were discussing, the visa bulletin, the employment section is broken down into 2 parts, the final action dates and then dates for filing. And we'll go to the dates for filing in a minute. The most important of the 2, the one that truly reflects whether or not there's going to be a green card available, is the final action dates. And if we go to the 2nd page, if you can go to the next slide, please. This is the final action dates for the employment-based green cards. The final action dates, and I don't want you, I'm going to go into the details of it, but I don't want you to, for those of you who are physically in the United States, this is not the table that will apply to you, but it is the table that will apply to you for the green card at the end. There's the 2nd table, which is dates for filing, has favorable dates compared to the final action dates. This is for you to obtain the green card. So what happens is, let's say that I filed my I-45, my EAD, and my advanced parole, and I'm waiting for my green card. When the visas retrogress, even though my application is pending with USCIS, if the visas become unavailable in any given month, then I cannot obtain my green card. I can continue extending my employment authorization document. I can continue extending my advanced parole because I have an adjustment of status application pending, but I cannot obtain the green card until my priority date appears on this table, the final action table. Okay, so again, your cases would fall under 3rd. If you see on the left-hand side, it says 3rd. And then if you move to the right where it says all chargeability areas, that's for everyone from every country other than China, India, Mexico, or in the Philippines, ones that are to the right. So basically, if you see there's a date that's 01 September 22, what that means is any nurse who had, or any professional who had an I-140 filed for them by an employer prior to September 1st of 2022 right now would have a green card available for the month of February. And again, this bulletin changes from month to month. And this is what retrogression is all about. Retrogression means right now there are no immigrant visas available. If there were immigrant visas available, you would see the letter C. So if you go up to first, you see the letter C. That means that an individual of extraordinary ability or a multinational manager or executive from an overseas company or an outstanding researcher or professor for whom an I-140 was filed by an employer or who self-petitioned, right now there would be a green card available. And that's why it says C, it means current. Okay, everyone else has to base it on the dates that appear. So before you panic, if we go to the next screen, please. This is the bulletin that controls, for now, it's the one that controls cases that are filed by nurses that are physically here in the United States, or not just nurses, any employee who's physically here in the United States. So it's known as the dates for filing. You'll see it's B, and on the visa bulletin, it's titled exactly like that, dates for filing. And if you go to third and all chargeability areas where they meet, you'll see 01 February of 23. That means that any nurse whose I-140 was filed before February 1st of 23, they would be able to file an adjustment of status application. That doesn't mean there's a green card available. That just means you can proceed to step number 2. Okay, until your party date appears or the day after appears on the bulletin, you cannot file step number 2. However, if any of you have had an I-140 that was filed for you before February 1st of 23, this month you can file an adjustment of status application along with the employment authorization application and advanced parole application. Okay, so that's why this table is favorable. That's why this table is better than final action dates, because it allows you to file the adjustment. However, again, that doesn't mean that there's a green card available. It's just an exception to the final action date table that we were just reviewing. Okay, so if the person, let's say, is from either China, India, Mexico, or the Philippines, then they're not going to focus on that first column that says all chargeability areas. They're going to go to their column. Okay, and so for example, if you are if your nationality is China, if you're from China, then if an I-140 was filed for you before July 1st of 2021, right now you would be able to proceed to step number 2 and file your adjustment of status application along with the EAD and advanced parole application. Okay, so those are the visa bulletin dates for February. These are for February, everyone. It will change for March. Sometimes it doesn't move at all. Sometimes the dates move. You have to track it. You can sign up so that you receive automatic alerts from the travel.state.gov from the U.S. Department of State, where you automatically receive the visa bulletins, and that way you don't have to continuously remind yourself to go online and pull up the visa bulletin. So you can sign up. All you have to do is go into travel.state.gov, and there's a link that you can click and you can register so that you can receive these notifications on a monthly basis, usually within mid-month. Okay, and so I just want to go to the next slide and quickly cover temporary protected status. I've been noticing more and more that a lot of nurses are under temporary protected status. And these are the countries that qualify for temporary protected status. I'm not sure, I don't think I'm missing any note, but these are the ones that qualify. So for those of you who decide that you want to stay long-term and you want to continue working, if you're from any of these countries that are listed, you can apply for an employment authorization document based on that status. You have to register for TPS and then request an employment authorization card. I just want you to be aware of this option because I've spoken to some nurses who are that fall under certain of these some of these countries, or they fall under, let's say, Honduras, and they weren't aware that they can apply for an EAD based on TPS. Okay, and that is it. Now, Anna, if you want to add any comments, please.
So there's a few questions in the chat and I'll let Mika read them. But in the meantime, I also wanted to say thank you for that presentation. Very helpful. I wanted to maybe expand to the nurses about the priority date AOS and the potential gap in employment that they may see.
Yes, absolutely, Anna. Thank you. Thank you for raising that question or that issue. So for those of you who have been on optional practical training and you're getting close to the end of your 1 year period, and again, since it doesn't fall under STEM, the recommendation, and this is actually the recommendation for all of you, regardless of whether you have an adjustment of status application pending, please renew your underlying non-immigrant status. Keep your underlying non-immigrant status at all times until you receive your green card. Why? Because more and more, we're finding that officers are making mistakes, a lot more mistakes than ever. I've been practicing again for 24 years, and I've never seen the number of mistakes from the government as I've seen lately. And I believe part of the reason is because after COVID, a lot of the officers that have been working for years and years and years retired. Maybe some of them unfortunately got COVID. But at the end of the day, what happened was the government had to hire a lot of new employees, a lot of new officers, and many of them are not as seasoned as the ones that used to practice in the past. And as a result of that, if the government returns an adjustment of status case in error, in order to fix that error, it takes a lot of effort on our part. In the meantime, if you don't have that underlying non-immigrant status, you may be forced to leave the country and process your case from overseas. And I'm sorry I didn't mention this before, but for those individuals that are overseas that have I-140s approved, okay, they can, there are two ways of obtaining the green card. Either you process the case while you're physically here by filing an adjustment of status application, or your process is completed overseas and the person goes to the US consulate. Those that are overseas cannot work under employment authorization because they don't file an adjustment with an EAD application. So bottom line, what's most important is, regardless of what you decide to do, whether you decide to pursue a green card or not, if you're going to be physically in the United States, you must maintain some type of status. And that's why I originally started my discussion with status. If you want to switch to, if you want to continue studying, you extend your student status. So it's an extension of your F1. If you want to change to a non-immigrant worker visa classification for which you qualify, then you change it from F1 to whatever that worker, non-immigrant worker status would be. If you want to go in, you're a religious worker and you are a student originally, you can switch from F1 to R1, which is for religious workers. So there are different types of visa classifications. Not all of them are easy to obtain. You have to qualify. But what I want you to walk away with, if you don't remember anything of what I say, if you intend to remain in the United States, please make sure you maintain your non-immigrant status, even if you have a green card process that's ongoing.
Thank you, Denise. Mika, I see Jack Kim's hand has been raised since we started the conversation. So maybe you want to start with Jack and then we can read the questions.
Yeah, Jack, do you want to come off mute and say your question? I don't know if
Hello, can you hear me?
there you go. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So, what happens if an international student, they have a remote job that is based on their home country? And is that possible while studying in the US?
So let me see if I understand you correctly. Please correct me if I'm wrong here. So you're referring to an international student who is physically in the United States, but
Yes.
is working physically in the United States, but for a company overseas?
Not working, like studying as a college student in the US.
So the student is here on an F1 visa, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And what is it that they're doing other than studying?
They might have a remote job,
Right.
remote job, so they might work remotely with some people in their home country.
So, and first and foremost, a student cannot work without authorization from the DSO, from the International Student Department. They have to have their I-20 endorsed, or if they're under curricular practical training, it's a little bit different as far as it has to be part-time. However, I wouldn't because it could be interpreted as if you're gaining revenue, it's a little tricky. I wouldn't take that risk. It's different. Like, for example, if you're a tourist and you enter the United States and while you're here, you're reaching out to your company overseas to keep in contact with them. Like whenever I travel overseas and I keep in contact with the firm, that's perfectly fine because it's a temporary short-term trip. My true intent is to visit. And I
Right.
just I have to keep up with my business overseas in the US, that
Mhm.
is. So that could happen, but
Mhm.
as a student, the purpose of your entry to the United States is to study.
Right.
And curricular practical training, sometimes you can apply for it, sometimes you can't. It has to qualify. But at the end of the day, I wouldn't take that risk because
Okay.
the government may consider it employment. Like it's almost like you're an independent contractor here in the United States, and you cannot be an independent contractor in the United States without the appropriate work visa. So I wouldn't do that because you can be considered, it could be considered unlawful employment, especially if you are receiving compensation because of the services you're providing to a company overseas. Your body, when your body is physically in the United States, you have to be
Mhm.
careful what you do. When your body is overseas, it does not matter. You can work for any company all over the world, but not
Mhm.
when you're physically here.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay, we have a few raised hands. We'll go through those and then we'll do the ones that are in the chat. So the next raised hand, you Chechi, I don't know if I'm saying your name right. You want to come off mute and ask your question? Nope. Maybe it's an accident. Okay. The next one is Takut.
Sorry, I'm here. I'm here.
Okay, go ahead.
I just have a question to ask. So I understand that we have to maintain our status as F1 students if, as she explained. But my question is, how does this affect our employment at Advent Health, given the restrictions on F1 visa? Especially that, you have to work part-time, or F1 students can't work 20 hours. I think they're allowed to work only 20 hours a week. And also you have to work within the school where you get admission in. How does this affect our employment? Thank you.
Okay.
So let me
So
clarify.
go ahead, Anna, please go ahead. Yes.
And because I represent Advent Health and Denise is our consultant, so let me clarify.
Okay.
Are you questioning OPT?
Well,
or
you can improve. I think you're just passing gas.
I'm questioning when we are when we're done with our OPT and we need to maintain our status.
So you ran out of OPT and you haven't done an adjustment of status?
No, I still have my OPT, but what I'm saying is to maintain your status when your OPT is done and the green card is not ready, we are advised to go back to school to maintain our status. So how do we balance that?
Okay, Denise, OPT, AOS.
Right. So when Anna says AOS, she's referring to the adjustment of status. Okay. So basically, you're on your OPT, you have just a few months remaining or a couple of months, however long. And we, of course, advise you always to maintain your underlying non-immigrant status, which is the F1. So you have to go back to school so that once your OPT runs out, your EAD under the OPT runs out, at least you can remain in the United States as an F1 student. So your question is, while you're studying, and how can you pursue curricular practical training part-time? Is that your question?
Yes, my question is, how do we continue to work in Advent Health?
So you first have to go to the International Student Department, make sure they allow you to work part-time under curricular practical training. So in your situation, let's say you have your bachelor's degree, you completed it, and you're now in the OPT period, that 1 year period. You are not able to file your adjustment because there are no green cards available, right? So you go back to school in order to remain in the United States as a student. You cannot work full-time because you're not on the OPT anymore. In order for you to continue working while you're studying, you have to focus on CPT, not OPT. And that CPT has to be approved by the international department. Your I-20 has to reflect that you are under curricular practical training, but they have to decide, they have to determine when it is that you can be under CPT. And again, CPT is part-time. So as far as for immigration purposes, those are the steps you have to take. You go to the International Student Department, you renew your F1 status, you request CPT, they tell you when you can start on CPT, you pursue your CPT part-time. Now, any questions regarding AdventHealth's internal policies, you have to, I defer to Anna on that, because I don't handle the schedule for nurses under CPT. So Anna,
And you, Tati, so we're here to answer immigration questions, but in the meantime, if you want to do a separate offline conversation, so not everyone's involved, but usually what occurs is AdventHealth's policy goes with immigration. You must have employment authorization to work regardless of whether it's
Hey,
part-time or full-time. So
We're gonna
if
come
you
over this way a
don't
little bit. We're
qualify,
back.
someone's
We're
off
back.
mute. If you don't qualify because you haven't received endorsement from your DSO, then AdventHealth would not be able to continue the employment. Now, based on your contract that has been signed, then once you're able to complete that employment authorization document, then the expectation would be for you to return to work. Does that answer your question?
A little bit. So, but as you said, who can I communicate with, like offline?
We have an email, immigrationsupport@adventhealth.com. That's a general email that comes to all of us, the immigration team. And then we can have that conversation with you. Immigrationsupport@adventhealth.com, all one word.
Okay, so I just send an email there and I get a response.
Correct. And my immigration
All right,
team
thank you.
is on here, Raquel, Noemi, and Carol. So we will be able to assist you with those questions. Mika?
All right, our next one is Takudzwa, if you want to come off mute.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I have two questions, and the second one depends on the answer of the first one. The first one will be, so in my situation, I just came off OPT, and to stay in status, I went back to school and I started the nursing program. And I just want to confirm, is it true that if you already have a bachelor's program and you already did an OPT, you won't be able to get an OPT after a second bachelor's program?
So
that's the first question.
Sure. So the OPT, and then do you mind if I answer your first question before we jump to the second? Is that okay?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, thank you. So OPT, you are eligible for OPT after you finish an academic program. So after you finish your associates, you can work for under OPT for 1 year. After you finish your bachelor's, you can work under OPT for another year. After you finish your master's, you can work under OPT for another year. So technically, a person can work under OPT for 3 years without even switching to a non-immigrant worker visa, as long as they're pursuing a higher level degree. So progressively.
Yes.
Okay. Does that answer your first question?
Partially. So I think the main thing is, since I already have a bachelor's, if I do another bachelor's degree, will I still be eligible to do OPT?
No.
No. Okay. So that was the first question. So the second question would be, in that case, since I'm doing the second bachelor's degree, how does it work when it comes to sponsoring, or is that something that won't be possible?
So you have to contact AdventHealth, and they would discuss the policies with you as far as how they sponsor, when they sponsor. I basically process the paperwork, the immigration paperwork, and I give advice. But AdventHealth has its own internal policy, so I defer to Anna on this one. Anna, can you guide him on how internally how AdventHealth sponsors green card holder, potential green card holders?
So essentially, we sponsor those nurses that have graduated past NCLEX and are able to move forward with an EB3. So you must have NCLEX first, because we can't sponsor anyone without NCLEX. You must have passed NCLEX, and depending on your underlying status, is it will be determined how long it's going to take you. And then sponsorship will be based on the opportunities or locations of employment.
Okay, I see. So then just to follow up on that, so let's say in that 60-day grace period after graduation, and I do get the RN after I pass the NCLEX, but I do not have OPT. Would that be something that Adventhealth would consider, or I should have OPT to be able to proceed?
So that is a unique question, and without violating any of your privacy, I'm going to suggest that you do immigration support at adventhealth.com. And
Okay.
so the way that I would see that would be the potential opportunity would be to apply for an EB3, but again, there's a lot of details in that question that I prefer
Yes.
not to violate your privacy on the forum. So if you want to reach out to that email, we can set up a meeting to discuss with you, if that's okay.
Okay, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Mika?
All righty, Azariah. Do you hear us? Going once.
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, my question is kind of similar to the previous guy. I have a bachelor, oh, sorry. I have a master's degree and I'm going to get my bachelor's in nursing now. But then I did my OPT for my master's, and from what I can understand, because it's like going to a lower level, I cannot get the OPT. So for me, the main question is also, how does Adventhealth come in helping people with the filing of the green card? I'm happy to have the question answered publicly here. That's okay. And I hope to follow up on email too.
So yes, again, without violating your privacy, we can answer your question individually, but the OPT, per what I understand from Denise, is that you've used your OPT for the previous master's degree. So to be able to plan your pathway or long-term, we want all registered nurses that qualify. So let me say that first. So Adventhealth would be able, or immigration support would be able to facilitate creating that pathway for you.
Anna, so if I may interject, I think and you may have understood this as well, but I think the ongoing question, the basic question is, if someone is not working with Adventhealth under OPT or CPT, if it's someone outside of that has never worked with Adventhealth, would the company sponsor them? So how does the company select registered nurses that have not worked with Adventhealth under OPT or CPT or ever?
Anna, can you hear us?
Anna?
Denise?
Yes.
Yes, Raquel, would you be able to facilitate that question? I'm having technical difficulties.
Okay.
Okay, Denise, you can go ahead with that question.
Sure. So my understanding, and I may be wrong about this, but the recurring question is, and just out of curiosity myself, actually, for those nurses that have not worked at Adventhealth ever, either under optional practical training or CPT, how does the company sponsor nurses that have never worked at Adventhealth?
So the sponsorship process is going to be based on the application, and it depends on what category this nurse is coming in, whether or not they are a nursing student that basically went through a US school. But based on what you're saying, it sounds like someone who basically is outside the US or they're in the US.
No, from what I'm understanding, I'm sorry, Raquel. What I'm understanding from the questions is if they're not an OPT and they're not on CPT, or their OPT has ended, once they're disconnected, for lack of better words. From
Okay,
Advent
got it.
Yes, okay. So how do they have an opportunity to be sponsored? I know the answer, but I would prefer that Advent Health answer that question.
So Anna is back on. I think we normally use you as a guide for that. And yes, and I think it's a no. So Anna, go ahead.
Yeah, so if they qualify, let's say that they qualify. Let's say they're students, they're pursuing a bachelor's degree and they've never worked for Advent Health, they don't have CPT, they don't have OPT. Would you consider them? Would you consider them if they meet all of the requirements from an immigration standpoint and
Yes,
from an academic standpoint?
yes.
Okay. All right. So are there any more questions, Mika?
Yes.
Thank you, Raquel.
The next one is from Jiang Lee. If you want to come off mute.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm international student from South Korea, and I do have a nursing license from Florida, and I do just started my residency program in Advent Health. Sadly, my OPT will be expired before the 90 days rule that Advent Health offer with the green card sponsorship. So far what I heard is you either going back to school for a master's degree or you're going back to your whatever country you came from. I did research for master's degree. Unfortunately, not a lot of school offer in person for international student, but I did find a master program for international student that will make me have a student loan over 60K, and we can't work. It just doesn't make sense for me to get a student loan when I already have a bachelor's degree in nursing. And if I meant to work as a full-time at Advent Health as a nurse, I do believe that Advent Health do pay for the school. So my only option was going back to Korea. But from this meeting, now I'm hearing that it's not beneficial for me to go back to Korea because we never know what's going to happen. So I heard H1 visa, we're qualified for that because I do have a bachelor in nursing and I do have a license. So is there any way that Advent Health Hospital will help me to get an H1 visa while I'm waiting for the green card?
So let me answer that, Denise. So right now, again, reiterating what Denise said, it's not the individual that has to have the bachelor's degree, it's the position that has to be available that requires the bachelor's degree. So if there are positions in Advent Health as an RN that requires the bachelor's degree and you are selected and qualify, that would be a separate conversation. But as I can tell, what I'm aware of right now, there's very few, if any, of our RN positions that require bachelor's degree from a new grad. They're usually highly specialized positions. Is that your question?
Yeah, so if I meant to go back to school, the only way we can afford that program is just getting a student loan. Is there any way that Advent Health will be able to help because we're employee of Advent Health?
You're a current employee of Advent Health while you have an employment authorization document, while you are waiting and are unable to work within the system, then Advent Health would not be able to provide finances. Denise, can you clarify that, please?
Yes, of course, Anna. So basically, in order to obtain the green card, it's optional. Not everyone has to file for a green card. If the person wants to remain permanently in the United States, when they're physically here, in order to proceed and file the adjustment, which will maintain them in some limbo status, there has to be a green card available. Unfortunately, we cannot control the number of green cards that are available. That's entirely up to the demand and the supply. So if the person decides that they are 100% interested in remaining in the United States or coming back to the United States, the option is either you stay here and maintain some underlying non-immigrant status, which unfortunately I know that studies are expensive. I had to pay a lot for my studies, and a lot of people are still paying for their studies, but it's the only way that you'll be able to remain in the United States under an F1 by pursuing studies, by pursuing an academic program. So you can either stay here, study, and unfortunately incur that expense that, schools are very expensive, and remain here in the United States until a green card becomes available. Okay, or you can wait overseas until a green card becomes available. So pursuing student status is optional. There's no requirement. It's entirely up to the individual. And I can't speak for AdventHealth as far as what they pay for, or the academic programs they put. I can't speak to that. I can speak to you about immigration. And so if you decide that you want to become a U.S. permanent resident and you're not able to afford a student program, an academic program, then your choices are either to change your status to a status that you qualify for, and there are not many, or wait overseas until a green card becomes available, in which case your process would go through the U.S. consulate. You would have to go to an interview at the U.S. consulate. You would not be able to enter the United States and obtain an employment authorization document based on a consulate process. It's either adjustment with an employment authorization or consular processing at the U.S. consulate. And that is, as far as the H-1B is concerned, just to add on to what Anna mentioned, it's not what the employee, it's not what the individual, their academic degree is not what dictates whether the person is going to qualify for an H-1B. It's the position, the requirements of the position. So, for example, if you apply for a receptionist position and that position does not require a bachelor's degree, it doesn't matter if you have a master's or a PhD or multiple degrees, that position does not qualify because a receptionist position does not require a bachelor's. So to qualify again for an H-1B, the position must require a bachelor's degree or higher, and you must possess the credentials that relate to that position. So that's pretty much, those are two of the basic elements of an H-1B.
And that's government-based, that's not AdventHealth-based. I just want to
Correct.
reiterate that. That is government-based, that's not
That's right.
AdventHealth-based.
Yes,
Okay,
as per the Code of Federal Regulations, the Code of Federal Regulations, the CFR, it includes the requirements that must be met in order to qualify for an H-1B. So as Anna mentioned, it's not any company's, it's a rule, it's a regulations by the government, by the federal government.
I have a last question. I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
So, let's say my OPT will be expire on like somewhere April, and that 90 days for employment will, I will have to have 9 more days for them to like go and petition or whatever process they have to apply from AdventHealth. Is it guarantee if I go back to my country and wait, is it guarantee that I'll be able to come back within AdventHealth employee, even though my OPT will be expired 9 days before 90 days of whatever that rule? Like, I just want to make sure because it's so complicated.
So Anna, I defer to you on that.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, I apologize, I don't know your name, but again, in not to violate your personal privacy, because remember, this is a forum. I'm not going to speak to any guarantees because the government determines whether or not the employees return. As far as AdventHealth's policy is, if we sponsored you when we are waiting for those visas to become available, AdventHealth has started the process to sponsor you. We just have to make sure that anyone that is sponsored maintains a lawful status, whatever status that is.
And Anna, if I may interject and ask you a question, just to be clear for the audience, do you sponsor individuals that are not physically in the United States? Not you, I'm sorry,
Yes.
does AdventHealth sponsor nurses that are not
Absolutely.
physically in the United States?
I think we're waiting for Raquel, what is it, 400 maybe? Waiting for visas to become available?
Yeah, 600 overall.
So yes,
So-
we do sponsor registered nurses that are overseas to come to AdventHealth. They're just waiting for their visa priority date to be called so that they can arrive to the US. So yes, we do sponsor
Okay.
them.
And just to add on to what you just said, the way that, so for those nurses who are physically overseas and AdventHealth agrees to sponsor them, and the nurse agrees to join AdventHealth upon a green card becoming available, the process starts with the filing of a Form I-140. So even for nurses that are overseas, we start the process. We don't, it's not as if we wait until the nurse is here under student visa, H-1B. No, the Advent Health starts the sponsorship process while the nurse is overseas. Even if they're not physically here, they start the process. I just want to be clear on that.
I have a question about that very quickly. Would that be after the 90-day mark of them working? Like they would be back in their country? That's what you mean, right? Because they have to do that.
So Mika, I'm sorry, go ahead, Anna.
Go ahead.
You have two groups of nurses. You have the nurses that are physically here and studying at the university, about to graduate or they've graduated. And then you have the nurses that are overseas. Advent Health sponsors both groups. The 90-day rule, I'm not sure what so
It's
it's
per
60
policy.
days. I'm sorry?
It's so per policy, per
Okay,
Advent
yes,
Health policy. Let me answer the two groups. So
yes.
the EB3s, or the nurses that are overseas, we sponsor and they arrive with an EB3. The international student nurses that are currently here in the US and they start on an F1 visa, after 90 days of employment, Advent Health will move forward with applying for their future green card. That's per policy.
Right.
So
So the nurses
my-
overseas do not have to meet the 90-day requirement because they can't work physically in the United States without a work visa.
Correct.
So if my OPT will be expired 9 days before the 90 days, where am I be at? Like, I'm just,
Right. So Anna, what I think she's asking, and correct me if I'm wrong, if she completes 81 days instead of 90 days of employment, would Advent Health be willing to sponsor her?
She's a
For a green
registered
card.
nurse, so Advent Health's goal, she's a registered nurse. Our goal is to keep you, even if you have a gap in employment. Your contract stipulates that once you are able to meet the requirements of the job, you will come back home to Advent Health. Does that make sense?
yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And plus, if you were on optional, are you on OPT? You're currently on OPT, so that means that you've been with the hospital for more than, haven't you been with the hospital for close to a year?
I've been working as a nurse tech for 3 years with Advent Health, but they said the policies only apply once you work as a registered nurse. And unfortunately, because I did use the OPT to work as a tech while I'm studying for NCLEX, I will be not able to qualify that 90 days employment as a registered nurse. But 81 days, to be fair.
So to be fair, you've been with us for approximately 2.5, 3 years. Advent Health most definitely wants you to come back home. So let me just put that out there. So
Okay, as
81
long
days-
as I'll be able to come back, I have no problem. I just want to make sure. Thank you so much.
Mhm. Advent Health wants to keep you. The fact that you have to go on a trip, as long as you come home, we're right here. We're not going anywhere. We're waiting for you. Next
Thank you,
question,
ma'am.
Mika.
All right, Eboro. I'm sorry if I'm messing these names up, but I'm trying.
No, you're okay. So I have a couple of questions. For me specifically, so I started with Advent Health like when I got my OPT, but I didn't sign that initial contract for sponsorship. I never got we talked about it. I talked about it with the immigration group, but I never got the contract. And so I took the benefits. And I understand now that I was supposed to be in lieu of the sponsorship process. So I guess my question is like, what are my options now? And do I still, I guess, like qualify for the sponsorship? I've been working at Advent Health since August. I just want to know like what my options are.
Raquel. So Ebora, I think I've been on the conversation with you for privacy reasons. I believe I've been on the conversation with you. However, for the audience sake, let me answer. So I'll answer you privately, but for the audience sake, normally what would occur is when an international student comes through our doors or nurse residency or potential applicants, they will meet our fabulous academic strategists and nurse residents recruiters, and they will refer you all to the international team. The international team will have the conversations with you all to determine whether or not sponsorship in the future is necessary or otherwise. That's when the international contract will be provided to you by the international recruiter. Once you sign that international contract, you will then be sent back to your nurse resident recruiter to be placed in your nurse residency program. After 90 days of start, because you've already signed that contract, then you will be introduced to the immigration team. The immigration team will ask you for redundant documents, trust me, because we do it for the government, I guarantee you. And once you provide those documents again, we will introduce you to Denise, the immigration team or the law firm, so that they can walk you through the process for processing for your permanent residency. So as far as your private details, Iboro, I'll have that conversation with you outside, but I wanted to give the audience what the normal process is for Advent Health policy.
Okay, thank you. And because we already spoke, but I just wanted to, because I know you mentioned that it would be a good idea to like bring it up here. So I just wanted to like ask the question. But I had another question about the maintaining status. And I know Jiyoung was talking about this earlier, but do we have to get like a higher level of degree in order to stay in status? Because I have a master's in nursing, and I was wondering if like if I go back to school and like I'm in community college and I'm in status, what I'm waiting for the visa to be like for my date to be current, is that okay, or do I have to be like getting a PhD at this point?
You can, as long as you're pursuing an academic program full-time, you can remain in the United States under an F1. That's how, remember how we started the conversation, the meeting with maintaining status? What type of status? Student status, worker status, tourist status, all of those temporary statuses have an end date. And you can extend certain statuses beyond the end date. So as long as you're pursuing an academic program, the F1 visa is a student visa. It's not a student visa for nurses. It's a student visa in general. So as long as you're pursuing studies and it's full-time, you can renew your F1 status.
And thank you. And just so like when I'm looking at schools, is there like a timeline that I can sort of be aware of, like looking for like length of programs, like how, like if my priority date is say somewhere in April or May, like would it be, I mean, I guess I just don't want to apply for like a long program that like once my priority date becomes current, then I would have to end it early, if that makes sense. I just kind of want to know like what is a good timeline to like for programs to look at.
Well, remember
in lieu of time, Denise, Iboro, let me refer you to our email so that we can assist you with career pathways that might be successful for you. There's a lot more questions in the chat, so I want to make sure that we give yours special attention for you specifically. So if it's okay with you, we'll move to the next question.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mika.
Anna, I know we're at time. Would you have time for one or two more? And then should we suggest that everyone send their questions to immigration support?
Yes, please. Yes, please. Yes.
Okay, so we're gonna do Naide and then Aviela, and then we'll wrap up for the night.
Hi guys, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so first, I have talked with a bunch of these people. Some of them are asking the questions as well. We all have those questions. A lot of us are F1 status and are looking for the next thing to remain in the country and possibly remain working because we have bills to pay. My understanding is that going back to the person that asked at the beginning about Advent Health employment, is that we can only remain employed at Advent Health if the school that we apply for the extension of the F1 give us the CPT. Is that correct?
Denise?
So you have to go to the International Student Department and speak to a DSO, and they will let you know when you can start on CPT. Again, CPT
Okay.
is while you're studying.
Yes, I understand. I've had CPT before for another degree.
Okay.
It's just like, I don't know, for people who are in Florida, especially Orlando area, I could not find a school that would offer first in class presential courses and second the CPT. So just giving people some background. I know Advent Health has several Advent Healths all over. So I don't know if any people present in this call, I don't know, is in Texas or Colorado or California or near any school that can offer the CPT. I'm just speaking from my research here in Florida. Now, my question is for you, Anna, regarding the contract. What happens when Advent Health has to disconnect us? Like, because right now we are employed, right? And we have, like, let's say we go back to F1 and we can, at some point we are disconnected from the organization in a way. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Like what happens,
Absolutely.
what happens to our contract? Because like, I know you usually go in a 30-day leave, and then they will put you in a 90-day leave or something, if that's possible, if there is an opportunity for you to come back. But at some point, if you are past those 90 days, they need to disconnect you from the organization. Does the contract, our 3-year contract, 2-year contract, whatever contract you are in, does that go to a halt and it just resumes when you are back to work?
So thank you for that question. I appreciate it. And you sound like you know exactly what you're talking about. So let me clarify that. You are correct. When your employment authorization document ceases to be current, then obviously you would have to exit the work environment. That being said, once your application or your petition begins to sponsor your permanent residency, our goal is that you come back to Advent Health and fulfill your contract. The reason why we are filing for you is because we want you to stay and be the permanent resident. So even if you have to have a gap in employment, which that was never our intention, that was retrogression that did that to us. The goal is for you to come back and fulfill that contract because we want you to stay here as a permanent registered nurse. That's the goal why they wanted you here in the first place. So to answer your question, your dates of service will cease once your employment authorization document is no longer current. And then when you finally get your green card or finally get your ability for permanent residency or your employment authorization document that you can legally work, then you will resume your, maybe not that same exact position that you're in, but a position within Advent Health in your facility.
I get it.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, I understand, because probably, let's say, like I might not be able to go back to the same unit I was because they don't have a spot for me anymore, but they would find another position for me.
Most definitely.
What happens if for some reason I'm not able to maintain status and I have to leave the country? Can maybe Denise expand a little bit more on that? My understanding from the seminar is that you are not able to get back in unless you have the green card, literally the physical green card in hands. And that could take a few years. down the
I
line.
appreciate you asking that question to make sure that's clarified for those who are asking similar questions in their minds. So you can return to the United States if you have some other type of visa. So for example, once the green card is filed, step one, the I-140, there's going to be a record of immigrant intent on your part.
Okay.
But if you have a tourist visa in your passport, you can come and visit as long as you
Oh.
have a valid visa in your passport, or you're from one of those countries that does not require a visa. Some can come, the Europeans can come under ESTA. So while the process is ongoing, meaning the I-140 is already approved or in the process of being approved and you're waiting for the green card, you can enter to the United States with any other visa that you may hold for the period of time indicated on that visa.
Okay,
That you're granted under that visa.
I think you explained this to me before, Denise. It's kind of like you have a no-immigration process and you have an immigration process, like an immigratory process. So the EB would be part of the immigratory process, and non-immigration visas, you can just go back and forth and use them as they are intended to.
Right. So if you have a tourist visa, and I'm assuming you do, if you have a tourist visa in your passport, you can have multiple visas in your passport. You can have the F1 and the B1, which is for tourist, F1 for student. If you have to leave the country because you're not going to continue studying, and you have an I-140 that has been either filed or approved, there is a record of immigrant intent. However, because you have a tourist visa, if you can justify the reason why you're visiting, let's say that you want to visit for 2 months or 3 months and you have an itinerary and you have a return flight home, you can overcome that issue of immigrant intent. Number one, because there are no green cards for you to be able to have immigrant intent today. But you may have immigrant intent for the future. It's an offer of future employment and is a process that the green card will not become available until later in the future. So what you would tell the officer, and of course, I would prefer if anyone who plans on doing this, that they contact us so we can prepare you properly. But basically, you would use your tourist visa, have a return flight home, have an itinerary, and if they say, well, but we see that you have a green card in process and you're waiting for the green card, you just simply say, look, there are no green cards available at this time. I am at the moment coming in to visit. I have my itinerary, I have a return flight home. My intent is not to remain in the United States at this time because I can't. That should be enough of an explanation if they were to ask you whether or not you have immigrant intent at the time that you're entering with a tourist visa.
And if I'm to go to leave the country and wait for the process outside, is there any different steps? Anything else that I need to do?
Yes. Thank you. That's a great question. So if we filed your case originally, it depends. I'm sorry. So you don't have an adjustment pending. No, there is not an additional step that you need to take. When we file your I-140, if you're not able to file for step 2 because there are no green cards available, on the I-140, we indicate that once the case is approved, that they should notify the U.S. consulate abroad. Okay? Even though you're physically here, if you're unable to adjust at the time that we file the I-140, we have to indicate that on the form. We have to mark cannot adjust, will not ask for an employment authorization card. When they approve your case, USCIS, that's why I was explaining the branches of the government, USCIS notifies this branch of the government from the U.S. Department of State called the National Visa Center. They notify them that the case has been approved for consular processing. You're automatically placed on the consular processing route because you cannot adjust unless there's a green card available.
Yes, exactly. Okay.
But if you're here and a green card happens to become available while you're in the middle of your studies or almost done or pursuing another degree or during that 60-day grace period, if you're physically here and a green card becomes available, we can convert your case from consular to adjustment. It's harder to do the reverse. If we start with an adjustment and all of a sudden you change your mind and you want a consular, then we have to file a form to let USCIS notify the consulate that your case was approved whenever it was approved.
Okay. If I am out of the country, the table that I'll follow will be the final action table?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Okay, we have one more question from Aviela. I don't know if her hand went down, but that was the last one that was promised. And then afterwards, we will continue on email communication.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I have a question. So I'm currently finishing my bachelor's degree. I did the AS program in nursing already, and now I'm doing the bachelor's. I'm about to finish in May. I didn't do OPT for the AS degree, and I want to do OPT for my BSN. I think this was mentioned before, but just to clarify, would I still be able to kind of like use my OPT, I guess, year for my AS degree and also the one from bachelor's, so I can have a total of 2?
No, that's a great question. Thank you so much for asking. And the answer is no, you can't. Once you forego the OPT, you have, that's why, and I was getting confused with the 90 days, Anna, about the 90 days after you have to apply for your OPT within 90 days of graduating. You should within 90 days. If you don't, then you miss the opportunity, unfortunately.
Gotcha.
But you have a great situation here, because if you are graduating in May and you start your OPT, you have an entire year, and a lot can happen in 1 year. I can't guarantee that there are going to be green cards that become available, but a lot can happen, and maybe immigrant visas become available by 2025. We don't know. It's all based on demand. But anyway, so the answer is unfortunately no. I'm sorry for that, but at least I'm happy to hear that you will have 1 year of employment on OPT.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, my pleasure.
Alrighty, thank you so much, everybody, for your time. I hope you have a great evening. This recording, the slides, and the email immigration support will be sent out to you for any of those who did not finish their questions. So sorry about the time constraint, but yes, thank you so much. I hope you guys have a great night.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Have a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Mika.
Thank you.
Thank you.